The mechanic's wrench stopped halfway through a turn as the pilot's words carried across the Buffalo production floor. "I'm not getting into that death trap." It was March 1942, and yet another test pilot had refused to fly the Bell P-39 Airacobra. His was the fifth rejection that week. The aircraft stood gleaming under the hangar lights, its fresh coat of paint still curing on the unusual mid-engine fuselage. Everything about it appeared innovative, from the tricycle landing gear to the massive 37mm cannon mounted in the nose. But the men expected to take it into battle had come up with a different name for this supposedly cutting-edge design. They called it the flying coffin. What made this particular refusal even more crushing was the timing. America was in desperate need of fighters. The Buffalo plants were operating non-stop, 3 shifts every day of the week, struggling to produce enough aircraft to help reverse the course of the war against Germany and Japan. Yet here was a brand new fighter that no one wanted to pilot. British test crews had flown it and promptly cancelled their orders. The French never received theirs before their nation collapsed. American pilots reviewed the specifications and immediately asked to be reassigned to anything else. Even Bell's own test pilots were starting to reconsider. The issue wasn't something a casual observer would notice. The P-39 looked sleek, modern, and carried more firepower than nearly any other fighter of the era. That 37mm gun could rip through armor as if it were nothing. In theory, the design was a stroke of genius. By relocating the Allison engine behind the cockpit, Bell's engineers achieved nearly ideal weight balance and cleared the nose for that powerful cannon. A long drive shaft stretched beneath the pilot's seat, connecting the rear-mounted engine to the propeller through an intricate arrangement of gears and bearings. But theory and reality split dramatically. That drive shaft created constant vibrations that shook the entire airframe, making accurate flying extremely difficult. Pilots compared it to sitting on a washing machine running at maximum speed. Even worse, the engine's position meant any malfunction hurled shrapnel and flames directly toward the cockpit. In a conventional fighter, trouble started in front where a pilot could spot it. In the P-39, it erupted behind him, often unnoticed until fire was already close enough to scorch his back. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from and how familiar you are with the air battles on the Eastern Front. Leave a comment below and share whether you've heard about the P-39's remarkable service in the Soviet Union. And if you're enjoying these deep dives into World War II aviation, make sure to subscribe so you won't miss upcoming episodes. These stories require extensive research to get the details accurate, and knowing that you're here truly makes the effort worthwhile. The aircraft's most serious flaw became obvious the moment pilots attempted to climb. The Allison V1-710 engine, strong at low altitude, gasped for power past 12,000 feet. This wasn't just inconvenient, it was deadly. German Messerschmitt Bf-109s cruised easily at 25,000 feet. Japanese Zeros performed even higher. A P-39 pilot trying to intercept incoming bombers would find himself laboring for altitude, while enemy fighters swooped down from above with every advantage of speed and position. Colonel Bruce Holloway, who evaluated the P-39 for frontline use in early 1942, wrote a blistering report that circulated through Army Air Forces headquarters. The aircraft is inherently incapable of performing the high-altitude interception mission for which it was created. Its service ceiling is insufficient, its climb rate above 10,000 feet is poor, and its handling at altitude is hazardous. I cannot, in good conscience, recommend deploying this aircraft in combat against the Luftwaffe. That assessment should have ended the program. In a logical procurement environment, a fighter unable to fulfill its intended purpose would be scrapped, and the factory reassigned to produce something more effective. But logic played a small role in wartime industry. The United States was still recovering from the shock of Pearl Harbor. Factories were rising, new workers were being trained, and assembly lines were being set up. Cancelling the P-39 would have required shutting down an entire production effort and starting everything again from the beginning. The delay would have been measured not in weeks, but in months, maybe even years, so the factories kept going. In Buffalo, crews continued fastening airframes, installing engines, and fitting weapons onto fighters that neither American nor British pilots were willing to fly. By the spring of 1942, hundreds of P-39s were leaving the assembly lines with no destination at all. They piled up at storage sites across the nation, rows of rejected fighters collecting dust while the war continued without them. Then an unexpected answer appeared. The Soviet Union, locked in a desperate struggle against the German onslaught, needed aircraft. Any aircraft, through diplomatic messages, Joseph Stalin made it unmistakably clear that he required massive numbers of fighters, bombers, and tanks, and he needed them immediately. The United States, determined to support its ally and keep the Eastern Front active, began sending military equipment through the Lend-Lease program. Included among these shipments were hundreds of P-39 Airacobras that no one else would take. American officials quietly saw this as a convenient way to get rid of an embarrassing failure, while still technically supplying the Soviets. The reasoning went like this: send them the fighters we can't use, keep the better equipment for ourselves, and hope the Russians manage to make something of them. If the P-39s failed on the Eastern Front, as they had elsewhere, at least it wouldn't be American pilots at risk. The aircraft started their journey by the most indirect route imaginable. They were loaded onto cargo vessels at U.S. ports, sailed through waters hunted by German U-boats to Persian Gulf harbors, then taken apart and moved overland through Iran into southern Russia. The trip lasted months. Many planes suffered damage during transit. Some were sunk by German submarines. But by late 1942, the first P-39s reached Soviet airfields, where they were greeted very differently than in the United States. Soviet pilots evaluated the Airacobra without bias or preconceived expectations. They didn't care about performance at high altitude because they didn't fight at high altitude. The air war on the Eastern Front was vicious, chaotic, and fought mostly below 10,000 feet. German Stukas attacked Soviet positions from low-level Soviet Sturmovix, hunted German armor practically at treetop height. The frantic, swirling dogfights that defined Eastern Front combat occurred in dense air, where the P-39's Allison engine worked exceptionally well. The first Soviet squadrons to receive the Airacobra treated it as a test case. Pilots who had been flying the Lag-3, a wooden aircraft that was underpowered and lightly armed, found the P-39 astonishing its 37mm cannon could bring down a German bomber with a single accurate hit. Its rugged frame meant it could survive battle damage that would have shattered the delicate Lags, and in the low-altitude arena where Soviet aviators fought, the P-39 was actually quicker and more agile than several German fighters. Senior Lieutenant Grigory Rechkalov was one of the earliest Soviet pilots to take the Airacobra into combat. His initial report, written in October 1942, highlighted the cultural differences in how pilots judged their aircraft. The American machine is heavy but durable. It climbs poorly, but it plunges into a dive like a stone. The cannon is superb. Today, I shot down a Junkers Ju 88 with 3 rounds. The entire tail was torn away. This aircraft rewards boldness and punishes hesitation. That mindset, boldness rewarded, hesitation punished, became the core of Soviet Airacobra tactics. Pilots learned to exploit the fighter's strengths while avoiding fights that exposed its shortcomings. They struck quickly from favorable positions, unleashed that powerful cannon, and pulled away before enemy fighters could counterattack. In the hands of pilots who understood what it could do, the P-39 shifted from a supposed flying coffin into a deadly hunter. The pilot who truly unlocked the Airacobra's full potential was Alexander Ivanovich Pokryshkin, a figure who would become iconic in the history of Soviet aviation. Born in 1913 in Novosibirsk, Pokryshkin had entered the war flying outdated I-16 fighters, struggling against superior German aircraft while using obsolete tactics and equipment. When he converted to the P-39 in early 1943, he instantly recognized what it was capable of. Pokryshkin created a tactical system crafted specifically for the Airacobra's strengths. He called it the Formula for Air Combat, a structured method that focused on altitude advantage, precise control of speed, and accurate shooting. His squadrons would patrol at medium altitudes, around 15,000 feet, scanning below for German formations. Once they located enemy aircraft, they would dive, building immense speed, close in to near point-blank distance, fire a short burst from the 37mm cannon, and then climb back upward using the momentum gained before the opposition could react. The tactic proved brutally effective. Pokryshkin's victory count began rising quickly. 5 kills, then 10, then 20. By the time the Battle of Kursk began in July 1943, he was the top ace in the Soviet Union, and his squadron, flying American-built Airacobras, was among the most formidable fighter units in the Red Air Force. German pilots began to recognize his radio call sign and warn each other the moment he appeared. Achtung! Pokryshkin in der Luft became a frequent message on German channels. The Battle of Kursk showcased the P-39's capabilities on a massive scale. German forces launched their last major offensive on the Eastern Front, throwing thousands of tanks and aircraft into an attempt to surround and annihilate Soviet troops near the city. The Luftwaffe deployed its elite units, expecting to secure air dominance rapidly. Instead, they ran into Soviet fighter regiments equipped with P-39s flown by pilots who had spent months refining their strategies. In the first week alone, Pokryshkin's regiment claimed more than 100 German planes destroyed. His personal total for July 1943 reached 23 verified victories. The German offensive, which relied heavily on air superiority to shield its ground forces, found itself repeatedly attacked by Soviet fighters that appeared suddenly, struck hard, and disappeared before the Luftwaffe could mount an effective response. The P-39's heavy cannon was especially deadly against German Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers, which were slow and easy targets for its destructive firepower. News of the P-39's achievements on the Eastern Front began reaching American intelligence departments by mid-1943. The initial reaction was disbelief. The same fighter that American pilots had dismissed as unfit for battle was apparently one of the most successful aircraft in Soviet use. Some intelligence officers brushed off the reports as Soviet propaganda intended to make their American allies feel better about supplying older equipment, but the proof was undeniable. Soviet Lend-Lease requests specifically demanded additional P-39s, not P-51 Mustangs, not P-47 Thunderbolts, but more of the supposedly inferior Airacobras. By 1944, the Soviet Union was receiving thousands of P-39s, and Soviet aces were using them to rack up tallies that rivaled the top American and British pilots. Pokryshkin finished the war with 59 confirmed victories, all earned in American-built aircraft, most of them in the P-39. The reason for this dramatic difference in performance came down to the operational environment and tactical doctrine. American fighter strategy in 1942 focused on high-altitude bomber escort and interception. The P-39 had been designed specifically for that mission, and it failed spectacularly. Soviet doctrine emphasized low-altitude ground attack and localized air superiority. For that purpose, the P-39 was almost ideal. The very traits that made it unsuitable for one kind of combat made it nearly perfect for another. Back in the United States, Bell Aircraft's designers were absorbing the lessons from the P-39's contradictory reputation. The aircraft's shortcomings had revealed major design problems, but its achievements had confirmed the value of certain bold ideas. The tricycle landing gear, controversial at first, proved much more effective than traditional tail-dragger configurations. It offered superior visibility during takeoff and landing, reduced the chances of ground loop accidents, and made the plane easier for inexperienced aviators to control. The company began developing an improved successor, designated the P-63 King Cobra. This new aircraft preserved the P-39's basic arrangement, but incorporated a stronger engine, refined aerodynamics, and revisions based on combat feedback from Soviet crews. The P-63 would never see extensive American combat use, but like the P-39, it would be delivered to the Soviet Union in significant numbers and perform remarkably well in Soviet service. Even more importantly, the lessons drawn from the P-39 influenced the next generation of American fighters. The tricycle landing gear became standard equipment on nearly every subsequent American aircraft. The focus on pilot visibility, introduced with the P-39's car door-style cockpit layout, grew into a major design priority, and the idea of mounting heavy, low-rate-of-fire armament in the nose, validated by the P-39's success with its 37mm gun, shaped weapons choices for years afterward. When Lockheed engineer Clarence Kelly Johnson began designing America's first operational jet fighter, the P-80 Shooting Star, in 1943, the aircraft that resulted shared noticeable similarities with the P-39's configuration. Both used tricycle landing gear for better ground handling. Both prioritized pilot visibility and simple maintenance. Both placed the engine behind the cockpit, though in the P-80 this was required by jet propulsion rather than by the desire to mount a nose cannon. The P-80 represented everything the P-39 had attempted to be, but never fully became. A machine that inherited the good concepts while discarding the weaknesses. The link between the much-criticized P-39 and America's jet-era breakthrough was no accident. It was evolution, shaped by hard-won lessons from both failures and triumphs. The P-39's poor performance at high altitude forced American designers to recognize the crucial importance of engine supercharging and consistent power across the entire flight envelope. Its impressive results in Soviet combat revealed that there was no single formula for what made a fighter successful. Mission demands, operational setting, and tactical philosophy all shaped whether a design excelled or failed. Alexander Pokryshkin, the Soviet ace who mastered the P-39, finished the war with 59 confirmed victories, making him the second highest-scoring Allied pilot, surpassed only by Ivan Kozhedub's 62. He received the Hero of the Soviet Union award 3 times, the highest distinction the country could give. In his post-war memoirs, he wrote in detail about the Airacobra, calling it the finest fighter he had ever flown. The American aircraft taught me everything important about air combat. It rewarded skill and punished errors. It gave me the means to survive and the firepower to defeat my enemies. More than 4,739s were delivered to the Soviet Union over the course of the war, accounting for nearly half of all Airacobras built. Soviet pilots flew them from Stalingrad to Berlin, earning thousands of victories against the Luftwaffe. These were the same aircraft that American and British pilots had dismissed as unfit for combat. The same flying coffins that test pilots had refused to take into the air. In Soviet hands, they became tools of victory. The assembly lines in Buffalo finally shut down in August 1944 after producing 9,584 P-39s of various models. The workers who built them likely never knew the full story of how their aircraft performed in battle. They saw the negative reviews from American pilots, heard the criticism, and understood that the fighters they were constructing were considered failures within their own military. They couldn't have imagined that on the Eastern Front, those same aircraft were helping shift the balance of the largest land conflict in history. By 1950, the P-39 had almost entirely vanished from military service. Jet aircraft had completely replaced propeller-driven fighters. Except for a few limited roles, most Airacobras were scrapped, their aluminum melted down for other purposes. A small number survived in museums, preserved as relics of wartime aviation technology. But the aircraft's influence endured in every American fighter that came after it, carrying forward the lessons drawn from both its shortcomings and its surprising strengths. The story of the P-39 Airacobra challenges the comfortable assumptions about technological progress and military superiority. It shows that success and failure often depend on context, that the same machine can be both inadequate and exceptional depending on how it is used. It illustrates that innovation can emerge from unlikely places, and that the road to advancement is rarely straight or predictable. American aviation engineers who once ridiculed the P-39's unusual layout would later incorporate many of its features into their jet aircraft. Soviet pilots, who received the fighter as leftovers from their American partners, turned it into one of the most formidable weapons of the war. The lessons from this contradiction shaped American aviation for decades, teaching designers that brilliance and failure can exist side by side within the same airframe, separated only by how and where it is used. The Bell aircraft engineers, who had created the P-39 with such optimism, never intended to build a disputed machine that would find its redemption in Soviet hands. They had imagined a groundbreaking fighter that would dominate the skies with its heavy armament and radical configuration. When American pilots rejected it, labeling it a flying coffin, the disappointment must have been immense. Yet their design choices, even the ones that didn't work, helped lay the groundwork for America's jet future. The Buffalo factory workers who assembled thousands of P-39s, fully aware that their own military didn't want them, showed another kind of courage. They kept craftsmanship and quality high, even while producing aircraft their own pilots considered dangerous. They kept the production lines going when logic suggested the program should be scrapped. Their commitment ensured that when the Soviets urgently needed fighters, there were aircraft ready to send today. The few remaining P-39s rest in museums beside Mustangs, Thunderbolts, and other famous World War II fighters. Museum plaques typically describe it as a failed design that found unexpected success in Soviet service. That description, though correct, overlooks the deeper meaning behind its legacy. The P-39 symbolizes something more fundamental than victory or defeat in combat. It reflects the messy, complex nature of technological evolution, where failures teach lessons as valuable as successes. The fighter that nobody wanted ended up providing American designers with nearly everything they needed to build the finest aircraft in the world. Its flaws exposed crucial gaps in knowledge. Its surprising achievements in Soviet use proved that design must align with operational needs. Its innovative ideas, refined and improved, became core elements of jet-era fighters. The supposed flying coffin became the cornerstone of America's jet-age dominance. When the North American F-86 Sabre, the United States' leading jet fighter of the Korean War, first flew in 1947, it carried the design DNA of the once maligned P-39, the tricycle landing gear that made ground handling safe and predictable. The priority on cockpit visibility and ergonomic layout. The realization that fighter development required balancing conflicting demands. These were not theoretical insights. They were hard-earned lessons forged from the humiliation of rejection and the unexpected triumphs of Soviet pilots. The story of the P-39 Airacobra reminds us that history's verdicts are rarely simple or final. The aircraft condemned as America's worst fighter contributed more to U.S. aviation development than many celebrated designs. The flying coffin that pilots refused to board allowed Soviet aces to achieve scores rivaling the greatest of the war. The failure that should have been abandoned taught lessons that shaped the future of aerial warfare. Sometimes the machines we discard teach us more than the ones we celebrate, and sometimes the worst becomes the foundation for the best.